How to read early season sign. It sounds kind of like a goofy concept, seems super simple, guys, but really we can get pretty in depth with this. There are certain things that I look for in order to kill bucks, mature bucks, this time of year that's different than any other time of the year. So I would say if there was one time of the year in which I really love to read sign, and granted I love to read sign all year long, I'm a big proponent of, a big believer of woodsmanship and staying away from your trail cameras too much or not putting too much thought into them. I'm all about reading the sign and figuring it out from there, because I believe those puzzle pieces help put the puzzle together a little bit better than maybe just trail cameras will. This is the time of the year in which I think reading sign is the most important. So you have a couple different variations of sign that I'm looking for, and I'll get to the more important one later on in this video a little bit. But the first one is the obvious. Oh, let's look for scrapes. The thing about scrapes, whether you're a new hunter or old hunter, is you have to have that eye for detail, because this time of the year, the ground is not necessarily pawed up under those scrapes. So what do I look for? I look for the licking branches where those green leaves are worn off. That tells me that deer are coming to these areas. And then from there, I try to figure out what the overall scenario is. In this given spot, we're sitting with a historical scrape area, and the only reason I labeled this, this scrape spot as one of the top ones to hunt is because I know where the beds are. And just a lone scrape, lone licking branch, lone anything by itself is never a good enough area or reason to hunt that area. I need to make sense of it. And right here, we're on the edge of a beautiful marsh, another field. There's diversity here. There's edge habitat. There's something that leads these deer to this point, but also I know where the bedding is, and it's not far. So that's super important to me. A lot of times those deer don't have to move super far, and if they do move far, they're moving at a very slow rate early season. So we need to know where the beds are. So yes, find the scrape, find the first scrape ideally outside of the buck beds or the bedding areas, and in order to even know where those are, we have to know what to look for. So this is where it gets way more important to me, the type of sign that I'm looking for. Rubs. I'm a rub guy. I love watching and looking for rubs, especially this time of year when bucks just recently dropped velvet. So any sign you see is fresh. It is happening now. So a lot of times what I like to do is I'll start on a crop field, or I'll start on a concentrated area in which deer like to spend a lot of time. I'll follow those trails back into different directions until I start finding buck sign. Okay, buck sign meaning rubs. When I start finding those rubs, I start paying attention to when those rubs become double-sided, rubs going both ways. Maybe it's on the same trail, maybe there's another trail 10, 20 yards away, 30 yards away. That tells me that those deer are coming and going. So once I start at that, that area in which they all congregate, and I start walking the trails back, and I start running into double-sided rubs, that's when I say to myself, I'm getting close. I'm getting close to the bed. Normally within the last 100 yards is when I see the double-sided rubs. It's not always the case. There's edges that deer run up and down all the time, but it's something I look for when I'm headed off these crop fields or these areas in which deer congregate. When I get to these double-sided rubs, to me that says the deer are coming and going, and generally that's when I find the buck beds. So what is a buck bed and how do I find it? I know it's a goofy topic and a lot of guys look for different things. Basically, when I see concentrated sign, this is the one thing I look for, is when I see concentrated sign, and I can look around and I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 rubs, we're in the bedroom. You can't always find the bed, and sometimes you don't need to. But when you find that concentrated sign, that means that buck is spending a significant amount of time there. Most likely. Nothing's ever a guarantee with whitetail hunting, but a lot of times when you see the concentrated sign, that's where that buck is spending a lot of his daylight hours. So we should set a stand up there, right? Wrong. Back up. That's where most of you screw up, guys. When hunting early season, you find the sign, you set up on it, especially the hot sign, back up. Find out where he's going, hunt the transition area. If it's 50 yards away, if it's 100 yards away, do whatever you have to do. The biggest mistake I see property owners make, public land hunters make, is this is where the hot sign is, this is where I need to be. And granted, we could set up early season on a morning hunt and get in there before he comes back and hunt that bed and maybe kill him. I don't think a ton of guys have success because they're not sneaky enough, plain and simple. So on an evening hunt, I'd back up. You go in there, find that bed, be aggressive, do your summer scouting, do your in-season scouting till you can find these areas, and then back up. Get in there once, blow it up, figure it out. So that worst case scenario, you have all that intel for future years, and then you know where to put your tree stands and hopefully get an early season buck killed. So when it comes to the private land parcel, and it comes to trying to find that buck sign, find the double-sided rubs, find the buck beds, find the areas in which they congregate. A lot of times those signs that we're looking for in the timber don't necessarily exist because the daylight pattern hasn't been created on a given property. There's a lot of things that go into that, but in layman's terms, or in the most simple way possible, what I try to do is I try to have a food source, a destination food source, someplace where these deer spend time, correlating cover, and a transition area in between. So we have to create that a lot of times, whether that's through timber stand improvement, planting of the food plots, anything like that. One quick tip that I like to use when laying out these properties or even buying a property is I like to make sure that those properties lay out well for predominantly westerly winds, southwest, straight west, northwest. We're gonna get oddball east winds. You never know, a hurricane comes through the country, hits the southern border, and we get oddball easterly winds. That'll happen, but for the most part, I want my food on the easterly portion of that property, transition area through the central portion, and maybe off to the western edge where the wind is coming from, having my bedding more secluded back that way. So sometimes we're going to go to a property and we're not going to find that sign. And in fact, I would say it's way more likely we don't than do, but we can create it. So how do we do that? We lay that property out, we make sure we have the bedding, we make sure we have the food, and we make sure we have that transition area. At the very least, if you got a small property, you need one of those. And I'm leaning more towards the bedding because the bedding will create food, cover, and water. Deer get about 80% of their natural water consumption through natural browse. Cover. Deer like to bed in cover. Food. Cover. So if you can only pick one of those three, that would be the most important one. But at the end of the day, sometimes we've got to create that daylight pattern to even see the sign in the first place. So when it comes to creating these areas, let's say we're talking about that 10, 5, 20, 30 acre parcel. We're really gonna have to focus on one given bedding area. Anything more than that is probably a waste of our time. Let's focus on one, make it great, and then hopefully that agriculture field or something is next door. Maybe we got a little clover kill plot or something like that to create that pattern, draw deer a certain way. But in that 10 to 30 acre range, we're probably leaning towards one good bedding area. Ideally set on the westerly edge, moving to the east, killing that deer on the way. Let's say we get to that 40 acre chunk. Okay, that's about the time we can start putting two really nice bedding areas, assuming we have the layout for it. And if we have two nice bedding areas, you know what that means? It means we can hold two mature bucks hopefully at a given time. If we just have one bedding area, there are things called bully bucks. These bucks don't know what's on top of their head. That 160 might be a bit of a softie, and there might be a 125 8-pointer who pushes them around. At least if they have different bedding areas to coexist, they don't have to spend as much time together. Maybe they meet up on the destination food source at night, but they're not getting their butts kicked and pushed off the property. You have a better chance once we get into that 40 acre range. Once I start getting to 90 to 100 acres, 3, maybe even 4, you can start squeezing them in. So it all depends on how much acreage you have. Whether you have 5 acres, 10 acres, 40 acres, 100 acres, there's a way to create bedding. It's just a matter of how much, so that we can ultimately kill those deer on the way to those food sources in those transition areas. Yeah, so just kind of reiterating what I said, guys, the things that I'm really looking for in a perfect world, whether it's on private land or public land, is some sort of westerly bedding. I can hunt on westerly winds with the deer moving off to the east. Maybe find the initial scrape or the first scrape outside of those beds. And that's a great place to set up, but a lot of times another tactic or tool or piece of sign that can lead you to those points is the rubs. And once we find the field edge rubs and we move back to the double-sided rubs, we probably are in the realm of that scrape, and maybe that's a good place to set up. Do not set up where the buck bed is, where all the condensed sign is. When you see 10, 8, 12, 15 rubs, back up. You're too close. So whether it's hunting over that first scrape, on those double-sided rubs, somewhere in between, that's how I would go about setting up to kill an early season mature buck.